Hey there friends, it's Laurie. I'm so happy you stopped by because today I'm sharing 3 new Christmas DIYs. I made a Happy Holidays Gingerbread Girl Wreath, a Christmas Snowman Candle Holder, and a Jingle All the Way winter tree. To help keep the cost down, I did use mostly Dollar Tree supplies, and as always, I hope you have fun crafting with me, so let's get busy. To make my gingerbread girl, I'm starting with one of the Dollar Tree wooden cutouts. I'm turning mine over and I'm actually working on the back side. To give her that classic gingerbread color, I'm adding on a coat of brown acrylic paint. I gave the front 2 coats. I then added the extra paint that was on my brush onto the back. I'm making a skirt for my gingerbread girl and I'm using a scrap piece of Christmas fabric. My measure's 14 by 5.5 inches. I added some hot glue about 1 inch from the bottom, then folded the fabric over to give myself a finished edge. If you have a sewing machine, I would definitely use it, but in case you don't, I thought I'd show you how I make my skirt with a glue gun. I then folded the top part of the fabric over about 1 inch. I added some hot glue just under the edge of the fabric and attached it together. As I was attaching it, I made sure to keep an open pocket so I could slide the apron tie through. I'm using a 22-inch piece of jute. I already had this on hand. You can always use a ribbon or anything you'd like, and I'm sliding it through that top pocket on the skirt. As I was adding it, it did get stuck for a quick second, and I just used a wooden skewer to help push it through. When I was done, I then slid the fabric down the ties and gathered it together. To finish, I cleaned up both sides, adding some hot glue and folding over the fabric. I'm adding the skirt onto my gingerbread girl, tucking it up under her arms and then tying it off in the back. To hold it in place, I then added on some hot glue. When I was done, I then turned her over and added some hot glue just under the waistband. I'm adding on 2 straps and I'm using a 10 by 3 inch piece of the same fabric. I added some hot glue about 1 inch down from the top and folded over the fabric. I then added a line of hot glue on the unfinished edge and folded my fabric over. To attach it, I placed some hot glue on the skirt, lining up with the top of her shoulder. I then turned my gingerbread girl over and cut off the excess fabric. And when I was done, I hot glued the end onto the back. To finish up, I followed the exact same instructions for the other side. I want to cover where the straps meet the skirt, so I'm adding on 2 small bows. I'm using 2 10 by 3.25 inch fabric strips, and I had this left over from past projects. I made 2 simple bows, and you can always use ribbon instead. I trimmed up the ends and then hot glued them onto the dress. I'm popping in to let you know that today I'm participating in my friend group collab. It's hosted by my sweet friend Liana from Liana DIY, and our guest host this month is Christina Elizabeth. Both of these ladies have amazing crafting channels, and you can check them out along with my other crafty friends by clicking on the playlist. I'll have it linked below in my description. If you're new to my channel, please consider clicking on that little red subscribe button below and leaving me a thumbs up. To all my returning friends, you know I'm always so happy to see you and I love reading everyone's comments. I'm making hair for my gingerbread girl and I'm using some of the nautical rope from the Dollar Tree. You can make it thin or as thick as you'd like. I'm cutting 2 pieces at 10 inches each. Now that I have them cut, I'm pulling the rope apart. After I pull the 3 strands apart, I then pull each one to make them into individual pieces. I used about 25 strands or so for her hair, and then I'm using 1 individual strand to attach it together. I found its placement on her head, and I know I'm going to be attaching a bow onto the side, so that's where I used the 1 strand of rope and I attached it together. I already know where I want to place it, so I used my hot glue gun and attached it. When I was done, I added a little hot glue on both sides just to make sure that the strands were all attached to the head. I made a small bow out of the same red gingham fabric. I used my glue gun and attached it where I had tied the hair off. To make her face, I'm starting with a black paint pen and making 2 oval eyes. When I was done, I then gave her 2 eyebrows. And then I added on some eyelashes. I then used my white paint pen and made a crescent on each eye. When I was done, I then gave both eyes a dot of white acrylic paint. I then used a smaller paintbrush end and made a tiny dot on each eye. I used some of the Dollar Tree's pink acrylic paint and then gave her an oval nose. When I was done, I then used the same black paint pen and added on a simple smile. I found 2 small red buttons in my button jar and used E6000 to attach them to the sides of her mouth. So that I didn't make a big mess, I first added E6000 to the end of a skewer and then onto the buttons. I let them dry and then I used my scissors and I cleaned up her hair just a bit. To add on her icing accent, I found some white rickrack at a discount store for 50 cents. If you don't have any of this on hand, you can always use your white paint or your white paint pen and draw it on instead. I cut a short piece for the front and 4 longer pieces for her arms and legs. I'm once again using E6000 and adding some onto the trim using a skewer. I added all 5 pieces, 1 across her front, 2 on the arms, and 2 on the legs. I want to add a little bit of icing onto her head, so using the same rickrack, I made a small simple bow. I added a dot of hot glue onto her hair bow and attached the white one. My gingerbread girl is holding a sign, but this step is completely optional. I'm using the words Happy Holidays, and I pulled this off of a Dollar Tree sign a while back. I'm attaching it to her hands using a thin piece of nautical rope, and I picked mine up at Temu. I decided how long I wanted it to hang, and then cut 2 pieces. I turned my Happy Holiday sign over, added on some hot glue, and attached both pieces of rope. I let the glue set up, turned my gingerbread girl over, and attached the sign to her hands. Now that she's complete, you can always hang her as is, but I'm going to add her to a wreath. I'm using a chunky grapevine wreath. It measures about 16 inches and I picked this up at Michael's. This one just happens to be a bit wider than normal, but any grapevine wreath will work. Getting started, I'm using one stem of leafy greenery that came from the Dollar Tree. I'm cutting each long individual stem from the main stem. I'm adding some hot glue to the end of each and sliding them in between the grapevines. I'm trying to match the bottom leaves with the top ones, and then I have one extra that I'm adding onto the side. My next layer is 2 stems of green ivy, and this will help fill out the wreath. They cost me 29 cents each, and I picked them up at a discount store called Marden's in Scarborough, Maine. It was such a good deal, I ended up buying 50 of them to use in future DIYs. I opened the ivy up, added some hot glue to the end of the stem, and then tucked it between the grapevines. I'm leaving an open space between the greenery, and this is where I'll be adding the bow. My next addition is some fern type greenery, and this came from Temu. You know, if you're a crafter, you're always trying to cut costs, but all the greenery I'm using you can find at Michael's. Just like before, I'm trying to match up the bottom with the top. If you're a little off here and there, not to worry because it all blends together. I'm adding in another texture, and I'm using 6 pine branches. These came from Temu as well. Just like the other greenery, I added some hot glue to the stems and tucked them in here and there where I saw open spaces. I'm making a bow for my wreath, and I'm using my bow maker. You can find these just about anywhere. Mine came from Amazon. I'm making my bow with the 2-inch burlap ribbon from the Dollar Tree. To attach my bow together, I'm using a 12-inch piece of floral wire. I'm measuring out an 18-inch tail. I'm then making 7 4-inch loops. When I'm done, I make another 18-inch tail and then cut both ends off at an angle. When I'm done, I place the floral wire over the center, pull it back tightly, and then twist it together. Then, to finish up, I fluffed out the loops. To attach it, I opened the wires, placed it against the empty space on my wreath, and then twisted the wires tightly in the back. When I was done, I added some hot glue under the bow, and this will help hold it in place. As a pop of color, I'm adding on 4 small red poinsettia flowers, and these came from the Dollar Tree. I attached them using my glue gun, adding one set on each side of the bow. I'm adding on 3 clusters of red berries, and these came from the Dollar Tree as well. And just like the others, I hot glued them in place. I think the wreath is pretty and you can hang it as is, but I'm going to attach my gingerbread girl to it. I'm using another 12-inch piece of floral wire and I'm folding it in half. I added some hot glue to her back and placed down the wire. I gave the glue some time to set up, and now I'm wrapping the wires around the grapevine wreath. After twisting the wires together tightly, I turned my wreath over and added some hot glue under my gingerbread girl. Now that I have her in place, I'm adding on my final accent, and I'm using 4 pine cones, 2 large and 2 small. I'm giving them a snowy accent using my white acrylic paint. After giving them a few minutes to set up, I hot glued all 4 onto my wreath. To finish up, I gave both of the ribbon tails a bit of a curl. And with that, this cute Happy Holidays Gingerbread Girl wreath is complete. To make my snowman candle holder, I'm going to start by making the snowman first, and I'm using 2 of the fuzzy round ornaments from the Dollar Tree. I removed them from the package and then snipped off the hangers. I then added on some hot glue and attached the 2 together. I'm giving my snowman a hat, and I'm using 1 mitten from a set of children's mittens that I picked up at the Dollar Tree. I need to hide the thumb, so I tucked it inside the mitten, and then folded the end up over to make a little cuff and hide where the thumb was. The size is perfect, and I slipped it over my snowman's head. To make sure it didn't slip out of place, I added a bit of hot glue under it. For my snowman's eyes, I'm using 2 small black buttons that I found in my button jar. Because I don't want hot glue to glob out behind the buttons, I'm using my E6000 to attach them. I placed a tiny dot on each button and added on his eyes. To make his nose, I snipped off the pointy end of a wooden skewer. I then painted it with some orange acrylic paint. The base of the ornaments are made out of styrofoam, so I just pushed it into his face. I'm giving my snowman some rosy cheeks. I placed some blush on the end of a cotton swab and then dabbed it onto his face. I'm making a scarf for the snowman, and I'm using a 1.5-inch Christmas ribbon that I already had on hand. I cut a 12-inch piece, and because it's wired, I cut off both sides. I wrapped it around his neck, tied it off only once, then used my glue gun to attach the 2 pieces of scarf together. I then used my scissors and trimmed off the ends. I'm adding on 2 black buttons just a bit larger than his eyes. I'm accenting his hat with a wooden snowflake from the Dollar Tree, and I painted it with my white acrylic paint. There's a small hole in the center, so I cut 1 sparkle out of this Dollar Tree diamond wrap, and I added it with my E6000. I let it dry for a few minutes and then attached it to his hat with my glue gun. I'm adding on some arms, and I went outside and cut 2 small branches off my lilac bush. I added a dot of hot glue to his side and then pressed in the branch. To make the riser, I'm using one wooden shelf out of a Dollar Tree 2-pack. I used my white acrylic paint and I gave it a coat. For the feet, I'm painting 4 medium-sized wooden beads with my red acrylic paint. With all of the pieces dry, I'm using my E6000 and attaching one bead on each corner of the shelf. I gave it time to set up, and now I'm adding on one of the white microfiber dust pads from the Dollar Tree. I want it to mimic snow, so I measured it on top of the riser and then cut it to size. I added on some hot glue and then pressed it into place. I'm setting it aside along with the snowman, and I'm using these 2 trees from the Dollar Tree. I'm going to turn them into Christmas trees, and I'm using an assortment of Mardi Gras beads that I already had on hand. I used my scissors and an assortment of colors and cut the individual beads free from the strands. I added hot glue randomly here and there onto the trees and attached the beads. I didn't have any set pattern, I just used the assorted colors that I had. You can always leave them as is. I'm adding on toppers, and I'm using 2 of the Dollar Tree snowflakes. They do have sticky backs, but I'm going to help them out by using a bit of hot glue. What's a Christmas tree without gifts? I'm adding on 3 wooden ones from this Dollar Tree sticker pack. I painted them with my red and green acrylic paint and then added on some white dot accents. The last thing I'm making before I put everything together is a small glass candle holder. You can find these at the Dollar Tree or just about anywhere. I'm decorating it with a piece of thin red ribbon. I wrapped it around and attached it in the back. With all my pieces completed, it's now time to put everything together. I first added on some hot glue and then my snowman. Next came the 2 Christmas trees. I added some hot glue to the bottom of my glass candle holder and placed that in front of the snowman. I'm almost done. It's now time to add on the 3 presents. To finish up, I'm adding in a small tea light LED candle, and whatever you do, do not use a real candle. To finish up, I turned it on and placed it inside the candle holder. Now that I'm done, it's a cute piece of holiday decor that will give you a warm, toasty feeling on a cold winter's day. Getting started, I'm using one of the wooden tree cutouts, and this came from the Dollar Tree. You can paint it any color you'd like. I'm using some white acrylic paint. When I was done, I gave it a few minutes to set up, and now I'm adding on some gray acrylic paint. I'm adding on a very light coat, and I'm brushing it following the lines on the tree. What's great about this is it doesn't have to be perfect. You just kind of add the paint on here and there. I painted and accented both sides, but only one side will end up showing. I'm decorating my tree using some greenery that I had on hand. I'm using my glue gun and attaching down one piece of pine. The next addition are 2 ferns from this Dollar Tree Frosty Greenery. I hot glued each of these on at an angle. My next addition is 2 small stems of greenery. What's nice about this tree is you can mix and match the greeneries and pretty much use up some different pieces that you might have on hand. I'm using 2 small sprigs of winter willow, and I picked this up at Dollar Tree. To add on a pop of color, I'm using 2 small bunches of red berries. I'm using one of these cute Jingle All the Way wooden tag accents, and these came from the Dollar Tree. I found its placement and then added some hot glue to hold it. To make the bow, I'm using a strip of leftover Christmas fabric. Mine measures about 32 inches in length and it's about 1 inch wide. I'll be tying my bow off with a matching strip of fabric. I'm first measuring out 1 4-inch tail. I'm then folding the fabric on the 4-inch mark back and forth until I make 6 loops. Now that I'm done, and to hold my bow together, I'm tying it off with the extra strip of fabric. When I was done, I cut away the excess from the knot. I added some hot glue in the center and attached the bow. I'm adding a hanger onto my tree, and I'm using 18 inches of white cord, but you can use pretty much anything at all. I added a generous amount of hot glue on the back and attached down the cord. To finish up my tree, I'm using a foam star from this Dollar Tree pack. It's a full puffy star, so I sliced off the back to make it flat. I used the same gray acrylic paint, painted the star, and then attached it on top of my tree. Here we are at the end of the video, and I really hope you had fun making these Christmas DIYs with me. Don't forget to check out the Christmas playlist with all of my crafty friends. And if you're new to my channel and you're thinking, hey, I'd like to come back and hang out with her again, don't forget to click that little red subscribe button below. If you're looking for more home decor inspiration, come on back and I'll link some for you down below in my description. My wish for you is that you have a safe, healthy, and magical day. And until next time, bye everybody!